All right. We're going to give it a minute to let people get connected and let this get started. And I'll go ahead and bring my guests up and we'll kind of banter around and then just get started here pretty quick. So, everybody, I'll take just a second and let everyone introduce themselves. My name is Matt Lee. I'm doing Cyber Matt Lee, and I have this Beard Banter concept that I'm starting. And I just want to bring on industry professionals and people that have a story to tell and really give a platform to have those conversations and talk about my shared experiences as well. So I'll let Aaron and then Dom introduce themselves as my friends and co-hosts on this one today. So go ahead, gents.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to be able to talk to everyone and be able to wrap our minds around this new update. But anyway, my name is Aaron Bostick. I've been in the IT operations, information security management space for about 13, 14 years now. I started off as an A+ certified tech and kind of worked my ways up through the infrastructure and then ended up helping tier 3 folks support their infrastructure. And then also kind of how I got bitten by the security bug as I was helping the sales team help our customers sell our security. So that's kind of where I got bit. So, but yeah, I've been in this for a long time. I've audited, I've assessed, I've pen test, I've managed, I've consulted. And yeah, I'm just here to share. Rowdy, happy to be here.
It's awesome. We've already got a comment from Jonathan. He actually was the guy that owns the rights to Beard Banter, all joking, fully illegally joking, still not aside, but joking aside. Yeah, but he came up with the concept. He was one of our first guests, him and his partner, and we talked about, zero trust and identity, and identity and access management kind of concepts. So, wanted to say hey there, Jonathan.
Live from Connect 2. That's commitment. That's pretty awesome.
I'm telling you, man. That's sitting in a hotel bar half drunk by now, I'd wager. It's 5:30.
That's all right.
Anyways, thanks, Aaron. Go ahead, Dom. No worries. I think people know Dom here, but
yeah, I'm Dom. I work with Matt at PAX 8 on the professional services side. So I've run an MSP prior to being here, and I did some cyber related activity in the government. So sort of seen the other side of that coin, and I'm disheartened that we have to have this conversation, but I'm very excited to talk about this new CMMC iteration.
Yeah. Like just to start this off, and I won't get into what CMMC 2.0 is, but I started when it was it was these 800.171 days as they'd made the adaptation from 853, and they were starting to push this through the defense industrial base, and they were starting to say, hey, maybe we should have some standards around CUI. We lost this airplane, an F-35, in like 5 minutes after we took 30 years to build it. We don't want that to happen again. Let's start talking about this, right? And like in my mind, I watched this just abject failure play out for like 3 years, right? This just brutal, absolute not giving a crap in the DIB and production space, absolutely, literally just trying to abscond from that. And then I had this bright, shining light. Right, like I had this glimmer of hope that was CMMC, that was this capitalistic endeavor of audited frameworks and the ability to say, hey, we have this person validated that you did it, and the left hand can't touch the right hand, and to watch it collapse into this, self-audited framework that has never worked for us, that brings us right back to where we were. It kind of just drives me into this very unhappy place right now around CMMC 2.0. And, Aaron, can you give any thoughts on how it may have impacted you, or your thoughts on CMMC 2.0, just maybe to breed our viewership into this change?
Sure. Well, firstly, CMMC 2.0 took my derb. No, but so in response,
no, but it did. Like,
it really
aside,
did.
You literally lost your job because they realized that 85% of contracts would now fall into a self-audited mode.
And that's exactly what happened. They said, well, if we're just going to go back to what we were doing before and being able to self-attest and self-report, all my perfect scores, what's the point? Why do I need someone to help me play right if there's no infrastructure or no incentive for me to play right? Besides, obviously getting hit through a breach and things like that, and having to deal with the implications of, loss of reputation, loss of trust in your company,
which didn't stop Horizon, right?
It didn't.
It didn't stop anything. They moved right on, bro. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the differences between Verizon and these smaller DIBs is that they have the money and they have the resources to be able to kind of pick themselves up from a breach. It's like Verizon. It's like, well, we're Verizon. We got hit. oh, well, are you going to stop, using us? We're one of 3 providers. But when you have, a smaller business, small to medium business within the DIB that's handling the information that it's handling, there should be always an incentive to ensure that we restrict and we place appropriate safeguards around that data. I mean, for goodness sakes, this is our federal data. This isn't,
right.
This isn't, our blog or our recipe data or something.
Hey, man, I'm protective as shit of my blog and my recipe data.
Right. But this is the stuff that protects, our country, your family, my family, our kids, and just as a last note, even though I have lost, my role, within the practice I had, I'm still extremely passionate because this work and this mission supersedes that. Yeah. So even still, I honestly have no idea, where things are going to come in as far as, work and, bills and things like that, just to be completely honest, but I'm still very passionate about helping the DIB and helping, security folks in general. It didn't take, the air out of me, per se. It didn't make me want to jump ship because, things are changing and all of a sudden now we're going to take that talent away and go back over to the commercial side. No, this is our country.
Yeah. Well, let me articulate the challenge, or Dom, if you want to articulate challenge as well, of why does self-audited suck? Why does this change so much? Like, that would be the question I think the audience doesn't quite yet understand as to what the challenges are with this self-attestation model, right? Like, and if anybody's not familiar, that is the main change, is that in the old CMMC, there was levels 1 through 5. They pretty much all had some degree of a certification process that existed, but most contracts targeted 3. And 3 was going to say we needed these audits, you had to actually certify, but more importantly, not only did the certifying have to happen, it had to happen in 2 ways. The company that did your certification cannot be the company that prepared you for that certification. It was brilliant, right? It had this separation of duties clause that didn't allow the collusion. And then on top of that, every time you got a certification, it still had a review board process proposed that would have been part of that final certification of that before it was ever allowed, which allowed you to help find that collusion. And now you find yourself in a situation where they've taken and said, no, that 85%, the bell curve that would have gone to CMMC level 3, is now going to go to this new level 1. And this new level 1 is you just do your own assessment, and then you go ahead and modify that assessment and say, yep, there's my score, I'm good. And no one looks at it. No one has to validate it. Don Harting just popped in and said, we all know the process is malleable depending on what they want to do. And I agree with that. I think he's got a point. Dom, do you have any thoughts? Because I think that I wanted to articulate the issue here.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of what we would call the high side stuff. And what I've realized, well, I guess let's talk about when CUI came out, right? Controlled Unclassified Information. So we'll call it days prior to the OPM incident, right?
Right.
Management got briefed. We had this whole for official use only thing, and pretty much everything was for official use only, which is essentially like exempt from FOIA and a couple other things. It's sensitive. It's pretty much how you would protect your business's more sensitive data, right? It lives on Nipper, which is generally a very secure network, obviously not perfect, but it was really unclassified, right? So we had literally your social security number, everything in your clearance documentation was unclassified. And on top of that, bits and pieces of manufacturing information. So CUI came out. It's like, all right, we need a better protection of CUI. We started to align things a little better at the same time to impact levels. But really what I've realized is if you take enough pieces of related CUI and you stick them together, it's now classified, right? Like the document I would look at is 10 other people worked on in an unclassified way. Now it's classified because I've put the piece of the puzzle together. So what that means is the little shop, there's probably a little machine shop that makes a bolt that goes somewhere on the F-16. So I steal that data, and I steal 10 other pieces of data. And I've got some functional component of some weapon or some piece of defense information. And to your point, Aaron, about being mission focused, that now compromises really the sanctity of that piece of equipment or that program or that operation or whatever. So the scary thing for me is we put all this structure in place to try to better protect what we can't really legally classify, right? There's requirements before you can classify a piece of information.
And
we
you also
came up
have
with
to
a
be able to
workaround.
get it to partners that exist in some of these capacitances that aren't classified and aren't handling that as their primary business. They don't just exist on that space. Yeah.
Right. But we've built controls around that, right? And we needed those controls. And 801.71 was a mess. Like, no matter how you look at it, it was impossible for a lot of these smaller subs to meet. And primes were just going to have to let them go, right? And start doing things in-house. And that would have killed the entire SMB set-aside program. That would have killed a lot of businesses just doing little things like making a bolt for an F-16, right? So this whole CMMC thing, I was excited too. I was like, man, this is clearly spelled out. We've got a program to make sure it's going to work, and we're checking. And I equated it to like CPAs who have to do peer reviews. And then there's the panel, I forget, what is it, Association of CPAs, whatever they're called, who does that next, that next level of make sure there's no collusion in those peer reviews, right? And it's a very similar program. And what we said is like, nah, like, turns out that was a little difficult and maybe a little expensive. And I think really for me, it should be hard to work with the federal government. Yeah. Like, if you want that level of responsibility, then it's going to require some work and investment. So it's really disheartening to see that they're going the self-attestation route. Like, it's like saying to the teacher, I can multiply fractions. It's fine.
Right.
No.
Right.
My 11-year-old
don't do
has
this
to take a
sheet.
test.
I'm not filling out this sheet. Like the one they hand you that you just sit and do busy work when you get in trouble. I mean, I never got in trouble, so I wouldn't know what that's like. But and they're like, no, I didn't do these because I already know this. You don't need this to work. I'm good, yo. Yeah.
Here's an analogy, actually, because I'm actually, I actually was waiting to hit that point, that self-assessment point, because it's really like this, and I've audited, for 6 years, for more than this, or 6+ years, under ISO 27001, SOC, NIST, FedRAMP.
Dude, that camera freeze is not your friend right now, Eric. It's really rough. No, you're good. It's good now.
I'm good now? Okay. You're going
to have to watch that one back.
Yeah, that's good.
The thing is, it's like this. The best way for folks to understand is like this. You need to go to the ER. You have a life-threatening illness, and you need to go to the ER. And you're looking, and they admit you, and you're signing all of your paperwork. And then at the bottom, of your intake paperwork, it says, in, let's say, in italics or an asterisk, some doctors may have medical degrees that are self-assessed.
Yeah.
How comfortable would you feel, even if you didn't know how many percentage of doctors had a self-attested medical degree? How would you feel, even at the percentage of someone telling you that they're a doctor? You know what I mean? And it's the same way. There is no way that me as a supplier, just switching angles from a practitioner to the DoD as a vendor, right? If I want to let someone process my data, and I needed to make sure that your information security controls and your posture was where it needed to be, according to the contract that you already signed, that everything needs to be in place, and all you're doing is you're telling me, yes, everything's in place. But now what we have is with this new system, which is why I was so excited about CMMC as well, is the fact that now you have this third objective arm.
A capitalistic endeavor. It's just making money to do this and keep us all honest. Yeah.
Right. That sets the standard, because auditors set that standard. The RPO office, or folks under the original system of 1.0, the RPO office, would be tasked with, or the RPO arm would be tasked with helping folks get ready. Whereas, the proof in the muster would have been is when you take your SSP or your assessment to a 3-POW and you have it reviewed and you have it assessed. So now we have checks and balances for everybody. We have checks and balances for the supplier, checks and balances for the auditor and the audit team, and as well as the RPO. But now when you have this self-assessment stuff going on, you take all of that away.
You're back to DFARS interim. You're back to DFARS interim ruling 2019. That's where you are.
We're back to where we were. And that's why I posted on my page, CMMC 2.0, the biggest pump fake, in federal cyber security history.
Well, I want to touch on the biggest pump fake. It's so good. So Don Hartung speaks to something that completely hits me in my soul. So the same thing happened with 801.71, and they changed the requirements. Many companies realized they're not compliant in any way. Yeah, but those same companies, Don, sat in front of me in a boardroom. I'm educating these people on 801.71. I'm saying you're already checking the stupid box. You're already literally saying to the government you're doing this. You have no MFA in place, so you can't be. You have no inspected systems. You have no things that define your CUI policies. You cannot be meeting this. You don't even have an SSP. You don't even have a POAM. You cannot be meeting this.
Right.
And yet you're checking it. And I look at this, and this is actually, to put it in perspective, they had the Makino, they're the giant 5-axis. They're about 30 feet long by 30 feet cubed, and you can fit about 4 of them. They had a 210,000 square foot facility with this many of these in there, right? And they had, I think it was like 12 Makino, the big bastards, and a train, and several of the smaller turners, like tons of productivity, tons of production. And they literally looked at me and said, Matt, how long can we lie about this? Like, how long can we actively not do these things knowingly and continue to not do it? And you look at this because it's in the name of profit. And their argument was, well, there's nothing in the contract. Yeah, sure, I can quote it in my contract, but if the other guy doesn't, then I still lose. And so, like, there's this kind of cyclic challenge that creates this self-attested will always create liars. Like, it will always create liars. And I think the challenge is that the people that go above and beyond to make it happen, that do get security, are only going to win at the cost of our national security and at the cost of our
productivity. Well, and here's the thing, too, is if I'm going to be like the honest company in the room, I'm going to do all the work. It's going to cost me a lot of money. My prices are going to be higher than the dude that lied. So what's going to happen is I'm not going to get the contract because I'm trying to pay for all that crap I just went through. But my answers are the exact same as the other guys. Right. And like, what recourse do I have? There is none. Right. And that's another thing, is it's going to kill the honest businesses that are out there. So if I'm that guy, why would I bother? Right. Like, why? Like, I mean, obviously if I want to do the right thing, but really it's going to cost me more to do the right thing in the end with self-attestation.
It's like this. It's like, here's $10,000. Don't take it. And I'm going to sit on the counter and I'm going to turn around. And I'm going to trust you 1,000% not to take that, right? And that's exactly what we're doing, is that in a business, let's say your business was 60% DIB or 60% DoD supplier, right? Or you were 80%, right? DoD supplier money. And let's say you were receiving considerable amount of funds from the DoD, right? Are you going to submit a terrible SPRS score, or are you going to submit your pitfalls against someone else in the lieu of missing that money? In the sake of integrity, when I know that even the level of CUI that I have doesn't even require a triennial assessment, what's the incentive for integrity?
Right.
What's the
incentive? And not to say that these providers want to be disintegritous. True. I think the challenge is when you start thinking about CUI in a factory floor and you start thinking about those things, there's just systems that cost freaking money. Right, you've got legacy XP embedded systems that are turning your lathes. You've got USB flash drives you're carrying between machines. You've got maybe some drip feed system that's running on an archaic, serial back end OTYs. Like, these things are things that are real tactical problems for the DIB. Like, they really exist, right? It's not like I'm trying to demonetize them. I'm just saying this takes away the level playing field.
It does.
At least with CMMC, you had this ability to say, well, but at least they're not lying about it. At least they're where they said they were going to be about it. At least, right? Like, but we've just like given up on it. And I think, I don't want to dispel the source, but, there's discovery around 7 or 8 different investigations of corruption inside the board itself. I think we had 3 or 4 board members replaced that were creating collusion companies that would filter this through. Like, right? Like, we're seeing this same thing where I just lost a little faith in humanity that we could overcome the traditional greed and corruption that exists that allows us to drive these things home for our own betterment, right? For our own protection as a country. And yet, even those same individuals couldn't uphold that bare minimum of constraint, and it just undermines that whole process. I mean, at least with SOC 2, those type of things, like you have scope whip challenges. Back to your point earlier in the conversation, Aaron, we were talking about ISO, right? Those are things where you could just scope whip your way out of it, right? You could just say, well, it's not in scope, we're good, and you get into those challenges. This was the first real poke as a security framework being audited. Right, like I wouldn't define SOC 2 as a security framework, really. I would define CIS much more as a security framework than I would that, or so. Yeah,
I would say SOC 2 is definitely more of a reporting of your operations and security controls, your current framework. But and that's the point, and that's the point, is that's the biggest kind of sigh that I had when I saw CMMC 2.0 was really that reduction. And I remember, but just reading. It says, I believe that 1 and maybe half of 2, which is now CMMC level 3, may have to go through. And the top half of 2 and then 3. I'm not concerned, about the folks who are operating at the highest levels.
We're going to do a sampling. We're just going to poke around, and then we're going to keep you honest through a sampling. Like,
reasonable. And that's the thing, is that what'll have to happen is that someone will have to get caught. Someone will have to get breached and made into an example of before, we really get serious, and I'm thinking like, after all the things that we've been through, the colonial pipeline, things like that. And a lot of those manufacturing folks, Dom, to your point, to those folks who build those rivets and who can build the inferences off those pieces of data, those companies are sitting in that level 1, lower level 2 bucket. They're not sitting in level 2, level 3. So all we're doing is we're giving those companies who are already having issues a pass to keep kind of going in that damaged state. I would have wished that we would have reevaluated that portion of it and maybe applied standards to those levels of maturity of 1 and 2 to get those standards for those
assessment
folks.
Validation,
Exactly.
Right, something with a much easier artifact of proof that's not as scoped and tied into the nuances of the SSP and the poem. But like, do you have MFA? Show me proof of those things on these systems. Like,
well, in the small machine shop, like if I'm not there yet, but I can come in, I can submit, this is the project plan, and I can continually show progress. That's something I'd be comfortable with. Like if I'm iteratively improving my cybersecurity posture, I'm not there yet, and I don't have $100,000 to spend. Great, we get it. Like, let's get you on. We're going to limit what you can do, and you need to keep this work plan with the revenue we're giving you. And there was another talk about, and I don't remember which agency, I think it might have been Defense. They were setting aside in the S&P set-aside program that you could bill certain amounts to gain CMMC compliance, right? Certain investments that you need to make, you can tack that onto your contract. Now, obviously, it could hurt your ability to get it.
That's the
at
point.
The end of the day,
that was my assertion on it, right?
It was a creative solution, and this just lacks that creativity of like,
and that's
why
why
we're just going to give up. Like,
we're just back.
And that's why I'm glad you said that. Is that because CMMC made the standard for everyone, so which means that CMMC now wasn't the differentiating factor because everyone had to have it. If you had to have this data, you signed this contract, you had to have it. So, security wasn't a differentiator. It was other things as to, how you could produce, but it took security off the plate. Now I feel like security is going to be looked at as more as a differentiator between suppliers and contracts, even though they're still going to be doing this work.
I agree. Right. So I actually have a partner of mine that was an MSP that has been like on the forefront of this 801.71 journey, literally bit into it super early in 17, hired an MSSP to go along with the MSP service that we offered in like 2018, 2019, like super early on this like deep level of I want this to be solved. And so what he's doing now is making tons of videos that go to these buyers at the different places and just kind of educating on how we're so different. But what that allows for is a little bit of histrionics. Right, that allows for people that want to talk about those things but not actually do those things to allow themselves to do the same thing without vetting or validation processes, right? And so like I feel like it's kind of a half measure that you would see some separation in the normal market by people advocating and marketing for themselves saying I've done these things. But I think you fall right back to the same challenge of if I can't prove it, and that is I think that's what CMMC is facing. I mean, outsider obviously here, but is this challenge of building this giant infrastructure to prove these things? And
and if you look at the spirit of CUI, it was trying to replicate a lot of what we did for classified data, right? If you're, let's say Ball, because Ball has a facility here in Colorado, if you want a SIPR drop, there are a huge number of requirements you have to meet and that are going to be like physically inspected and validated. It takes 6 months to get a SIPR drop. Like if you need a secret facility, if you need a top secret facility, it's going to take a year and a lot of money, right? And what they did is they scaled that down and said, look, you're not handling classified information, but this is sensitive because X, Y, and Z. It's part of a weapon, it's personnel data, it's whatever it is. And that really filled a gap that we had with unclassified information. Right, that is still highly sensitive, and I think that's another thing to drive home to folks is unclassified doesn't mean not sensitive, right? It means that its threat to national security is low to negligible. Classification is just a measurement of the threat to national security. So unclassified is still highly sensitive data. Most of it is. The majority of soldiers in the Army, for example, work primarily with unclassified data and maybe secret, right? So we're not talking about website pages and just basic stuff. This is sensitive data still. And it's not being treated as such.
Especially when you get into the manufacturing extension of these arms and even data processing and service providers. Like there's a lot of service providers that do the CATIA work for those things based on that original information and very deep, like sensitive information that is the whole part that understands how those pieces go together. So you start getting into not just the primary people or the primes making, but also the service providers that are doing the work. And right. You know, I know of a service provider that approached this by doing all Citrix-based access to these endpoints and screen capture, watermarking, and all kinds of stuff to validate the identity of their providers that are doing the work. And there's just no benefit to spending that few $100,000 if you could do the same shit by saying, hey, Dom, here's the policy. It says you can take this home and work on it on your own shared use device. And it's kind of, it's just without the inspection, it allows you to have scope creep that allows you to lie to yourself in a lot of ways, I think, as a company handling, CUI in general. So,
and the thing that's really the one thing that I also hear is speaking of policy and procedures is that now that CMMC level 1 through 5 has gone away as we know it, and that we're moving back to the NIST 800-171 line, that the need for functioning policy or adequate policy, they feel, or actually I've heard people saying that they just don't have to do anymore. And
glad Shiva.
I say, well, yes, you do need policies. Yes, you need procedures. Yes, you need a risk assessment because you need an SSP. You need the documentation to prove you have a program. If you don't have the documentation, you don't have a program. And let's be honest here. Let's just take it to the side of commercial, right? What happens when a customer, what happens when a vendor gets breached? And let's say they get sued, and it's found, or they're sued, and they're found that they didn't have any policy, they didn't have any procedures, they didn't have anything aligned to having anything formal for information security program. They're going to be found negligent. And that's aside from CMMC, that's aside from NIST 800-171. It's your job for due care. Ultimately, that's the point of this. Due care, CMMC is the bubble coat that you wrap around, that you wear for due care. That's how you achieve that. And to say,
it boils back to that reasonable person rule and due care. And are you actually doing things? And I think, but to your point, without the policy, even if you are doing things, right? Even if you are going forward and doing, if you can't prove it, if it's not immutable, and you don't have a way to show that and show the documentation, show the iterants, I think you leave yourself susceptible to a lot of the defensibility challenges that, come with this too. And I think your point is like, okay, so these companies that have said they're 800-171, or let's call them saying they're CMMC 1, and they're good, and they're self-attesting, they've put in the scores, they've said yes to all these things. Like, is there a review, whether that's publicly, is that through civil actions, is that through, actually maybe potentially even the legal aspects of this from federally lying on a form that's used to procure money from a fraud perspective? Like, where does this start to come back? And I think my advocation to companies is like, you should have the policies, you should show you're doing them, but you should focus on it from that of defensibility. And I mean, the CMMC changes, aside from that, even I think to your point, is this is all about due care. Right. You can't see my hands extending, but they're wide out. Like,
and for us, I mean, let's say for those companies who are 2 and 3 above, right? Those companies who have the resources, have the money. Yeah. We've worked inside of companies who had information security programs before. And what policies allow you to do is policies allow you to have a golden ticket for senior management support. And
sure.
And the reason why I said this is because in a prior role, like I said, I'm a CISSP, I'm a CISA, I've been information security management in my past role. I was a management and I was a manager, and that was the hardest thing, was without having a solid policy, to argue your standards with someone as to why they shouldn't have to do something. Whereas I could point the policy and say you're out of compliance with the policy, and that's why you can't do this.
Right.
It's the management support, it's the senior support of the initiative, and it's the acknowledgement of those initiatives within the business. That helps us get stuff done.
Yeah, I think that getting that management support and executive buy-in and level is outside of CMMC in a microcosm starting to happen. You're starting to get these things to where the business executives are starting to say, listen, maybe this cybersecurity thing is something we need to focus on and we need to champion internally. I think to your point, like if you start thinking about policy and even to Don's point about FSOs or, the security officers inside the facilities, they're oftentimes just like literally just bringing the same puke through that's basically just a clerk level, not saying, am I actually protecting this data? Is this rightly classified? Has it been done properly with process? Have I followed those things? Can I prove that we've followed those things, right? Like it's very little side of that being involved in that. And that's even if they have those roles filled. Like I was trying to help solve that with a, FSO as a service or ISO as a service type a model where you have, third parties like Jeremy Jackson and Amy Billinger at Anil are doing kind of those things where they're bringing in, and oftentimes they have to work with the ones that have massive executive involvement and understanding, and that are willing to overcome this. Like, is this profitable? Is this the right choice? Can it takes some prescience, I think, in a lot of people's mind, and a lot of that just went away. That even drove people. Like, look what happened when the DFARS interim ruling came out. Like, I actually had 3 manufacturers that we had been screaming to, like in every way, like crawling up, holding the boom box outside the window, like all the methods to get their damn attention about CMMC. And they call us and go, we just got this thing that we've got to submit. Can you get us ready for this inspection and this thing? Like, you've been ignoring us for like the last 3 years, and now here DFARS interim actually finally has a little bit of teeth, and you got to self-assess, and even that's a struggle because you don't have an SSP, you have no artifacts, you have nothing to base it on. It's all fake, and now you're asking to rush through it like it's something brand new. And I think the challenge is that's how disconnected, I'm frozen up. That's how disconnected, the populace really is in the DIB around these companies from an executive understanding and participation. And so you don't have very many that really are there and are backing it fully. I mean, I'll shout out David May. There's a good friend of mine who his company absolutely is that way, and he's the CEO. He's been behind it from the very beginning, and it's been very smooth sailing for them to actually make it justifiable and make their rates make sense and make them profitable. And they are doing all these things. They've been through the transition, and I think the fear really is the transition. It's really not the ongoing costs. Right? Like if I have to add MFA, okay, damn, that's really expensive because I have to buy this. Nope, you could change your identity provider. You could change what you're structuring it through. You can do projects that are investments capital-wise that get you there. And the change in net cost isn't massive. I mean, there's definitely some there, but not, it's like this thing I say. Did Horizon have any challenges getting the budget after their breach? Have I ever met anyone that...
Well, that's cybersecurity in a nutshell.
Yeah.
That's... the CISO gets ignored until there's a breach, and then they fire the CISO and hire a new one, and suddenly they have an unlimited budget. And it's what we've been trying to fix. And CMMC did that was going to do that in a real way.
Yeah, CMMC, once we pulled the audit arm, we took the venom out of the snake of CMMC. We took the reason, we took the integrity behind it, we took the urgency behind it. Yep. Because without the parent shaking and saying, hey, you got 5, counting down from that 5, 4, 3, that's what the DOD was doing, right? Essentially, get your stuff together. But now that we don't have that, and I know just from a practitioner standpoint, from seeing these companies, from conducting CMMC level 3 assessments, in NIST 871 assessments and managing teams that have before, these folks are trying to get CMMC level 3 certified without an SSP. Without a risk assessment, without an information security policy, without an incident response
like literally, like swear to God, like literally, like that's the core freaking component you base it on as a system security plan. And I looked at my MSSP that I had hired, and I was talking to him about 800.171, its mapping towards SSP and how we'd want to do that if I wanted to do some master SSP that I could sell through my services as part of what like this whole vision. This was back 4 or 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and the guy that's the CEO of this MSSP goes, what's an SSP? That's not even a thing. And I'm like,
yep. That's a real question. I've had that. It's a real question.
Oh God. Okay, now I know Shiva's like. Okay, so I gotta say, Shiva's my boy. Like, I love the guy. And like, he goes lies, and I know he's being facetious. Self-attestation works. Ask HIPAA and CGIS. Yeah, no shit.
What's funny is that speaking.
You guys, I gotta drop. Sorry, thanks for having me on. I gotta head.
Oh, no worries.
See you guys later. Great to meet you, Aaron.
Thank you, Dom. Nice to meet you as well. What's funny is that as they said about HIPAA, which is kind of funny, is that there really still isn't. I mean, but beyond high trust, high trust aside, and high tech and high trust aside,
and even included in some ways. But
there still isn't, a technical benchmark for where people are supposed to be.
No,
it's like there's no what's the word? There's no
baseline. There's no standard of
baseline.
Care.
Exactly.
There's no standard of care. And I think, Shiva and makes a lot of big points about this, right? That there's no barrier to entry in this industry either.
Right.
There's nothing that says I know what I'm talking about. I could be a blithering idiot. In fact, sometimes I think I probably am. But you realize that there's just nothing that says here's the standard. Even as an industry, we are very inclusive. Even the companies I work for are like, listen, we have to serve the constituency. We have to serve because there's nothing that says you have to have this to be in a constituency. There's a board of cosmetology in every state.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
That's dealing with this that is not anything like right. Like I can't even pay my cosmetologist if I don't have a company. And I think the challenge is like we just don't have a standard of care, as you kind of pretty well said. So
I can't believe that the standard of care for information security for just PII, personal, PII and personal data would be more stringent than in the federal side. And the reason why I say that is because I've worked in a company who had absolutely no federal data, right? Just straight ISO 27001 shop, right?
Yeah.
And it made it all the way up to the CFO, as to where our status was, because the customers were so adamant about having a vendor who had those standards in place that they would have cut our contracts had they failed or that we lost that certification. So why don't we have the same urgency over in the federal space with our federal information? This is our country. This is
Accurate
our government.
Statement.
Why don't we have that same level of standard and urgency? That's the one thing I'm trying to understand.
Well, and I think, both to Jonathan's point and actually to Shiva's point too. So let's take them in order here. So Jonathan's point was, I think, I'm sorry, Don's, I apologize. Don's point was, I think a big issue is honestly how many audits can even get done by the government or even a newly formed entities that are getting created capitalistically to exist for these things, like the Aligns of the world and the Edwards Performance Systems and all the players that are springing up to help build this. I think we could have gotten it done. I think the challenge is that you allowed the boards and the teams to be involved to have opportunities to make a lot of profit from that. And I think you see that collapse just like it always has been. And I think, there you go, Shiva. Maybe that is an accurate point too. But so then on Shiva's other point was there's no reliability in a PII breach. Yeah. I mean, I think the nice thing about that statement is that you are starting to see the ability for citizens to take action upon those things. And I know they have no teeth, and you start with, GDPR, but then you start looking at, we're actually having our attorney Tyler come on to a Beard Banter to talk about privacy and some of the legal aspects of privacy as we kind of see it. But, CCPA, you've got Colorado's Privacy Act, you've got New York Shield Act, and they all are nothing, right? Granted, I agree with Shiv on that, but they're all the smoke of the beginnings of things and systems that are function on did you lose the data or not. And we worked in the past on this like best efforts model, or I did due care, or I met stand. But as you start looking at privacy and the way those are being approached is, did you lose the data, bro? Like, did you lose the data? Should you have collected the data? It's not, did you do the right things? You're starting to see things where it's like, did you lose the data? And you're also starting to see this closure in the prosecutorial gap around those things too, as you start seeing states take this on and have case law and evidence around these things and start actually enforcing it. So I don't think it's there. Like we're like 0.01% there, but I do think it's the smoke that says we're starting to see the incumbency start to deal with these challenges. So I do think he's right, and also I think we're seeing a change that privacy loss will probably have much bigger teeth than regulatory loss around those things. So, but yeah, in my opinion, of course, obviously everybody's got them. And then Shiva went on to say, CMMC should have been for the DoD, by the DoD. And as I think about that, I got mixed feelings about that statement, and maybe needs more explanation. Shiva, you're welcome to jump in too. I can send you the link if you're somewhere stationary and want to do so. But CMMC should have been for the DoD, by the DoD. In my thoughts, I think he's saying like it shouldn't have had all this external capital aspects of this playing in. I don't think they could have scaled it inside the DoD, but I think the control should have come from the DoD.
Yes.
I think the guidelines and the things that should be edited and brought in. Oh, good. Shiva's back. Let's bring Shiva on for just a minute.
Yeah.
We've got a few left.
Go
ahead.
It's just like when you have a customer who sets standards for a vendor who is going to manage and take their data. This is how I want my vendors, or who I'm going to give my data to play. And you're right, the DoD should have said that. But I also agree with you as well. I don't think the DoD internally, because we already know the bureaucracy of just dealing with the federal government as it is. Let's take us aside back with, FedRAMP, right? And being able to review SSP and working with the JAB and, that back and forth, working with the PMO, just that, enough, is a lot of just bureaucracy instead.
Don.
And
the real question is,
think,
how much pain will the politicos take before they crumble?
Right. And I love that, and I think that it's actually better that we have an objective viewpoint outside of the view and the lens of the government and outside of the view of the DoD supplier. And that was the point, is to have that external source in there to really mediate and direction point.
Yeah, sounds like they've really cocked it up, in my opinion. So, success there.
Yep.
But anyways, we as practitioners need to hold ourselves at a higher standard. Yeah, Don, that's literally like my like belief in life, right? I think that is the, what can I change? Like if I look at this world and say, what can I change? I cannot change the laws that quickly. I cannot change the way our government decides to handle it. But what I can change is educating the MSP and educating the SMB around these security challenges. And who am I? I'm nobody. But I promise you that, I think as we all start to wrestle with this and help educate and bring this tide up, and Shiva, I just got to get him to fix it, right? Shiva says, there's got to raise the bar. No, it's raise the tide. Like that's literally my tagline. Like you got to use it right. But I do think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And I felt like in my former MSP and even in the company I find myself in today, that there's a need and a want to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And, the fact they even hired me just to be an external resource and bring that experience of what I had in the past to help them guide that for the company I'm at today, it was awesome. Shiva, I sent that to you on your LinkedIn in chat. So I sent you the link for the Restream join.
No, and as far as practitioners, we need to ensure that we hold ourselves to the highest standard, because they're coming. The DIB is coming to us to ask how they should do this stuff. When CMMC 1.0 dropped, I will say there wasn't a lot of guidance as to how this to be dropped or how controls should be prioritized versus policy versus not.
Sure.
And what
I've
also
seen, like this weird relationship between them and what got contracts and what got fast tracked and what.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. No. And being able to hold ourselves to a higher standard means that we essentially will be able to hold the standard of the DIB, because we're informing them on how we see things should be implemented and how things should be set up. We set the standard through education. We set the standard through advisory. We set the standard through letting folks know how important this is and why, and reiterating that point. And reiterating that not only the timeline as to when you should have had things done, but the steps involved as well.
And it unfortunately falls on like deaf ignorant ears most of the time.
Right.
So, Shiva, welcoming you to the party. And Shiva, meet Aaron. Aaron comes to me through a friend, Juan Fernandez, and he's been a practitioner in this space, has been actively working in the CMMC kind of guidance space until Friday last week, when his company decided that they no longer were going to be doing inspections as a result of the CMMC 2.0 change for 85%.
Why not? Now it actually has real teeth and will make lasting change and be yet another compliance regime for me to make podcast episodes shitting on.
Now I understand the connotation. No, I tease.
I think really, just as a personal note, which is true. Yeah, my practice decided that they were going to close the CMMC track down, which fortunately means I did, lose a position. I'm not, bitter or angry about it, but I think that with this change, it hurt more than I think just the need for assurance within the CMMC. I think it really kind of cut a lot of cybersecurity talent coming over to help the DIB. Because what happened now is we have CMMC in place. We had all these folks now that we knew that had to be certified, that had to be, up to a certain level. So that created another pseudo industry of folks coming over. And because of lack of cybersecurity knowledge as it already is, let alone the commercial, let alone the federal space, it opened up the doors to allow all these new folks, these new ideas, these new ways of thinking to help improve that. But now that you've kind of taken that out and closed the door and folks can kind of self-attest, we've really kind of cut that out because there's no need to advise. There's no need to improve. If I can just check the box, why do I need to go spend some money, with an RPO or with a consultant when I really don't have to? Or when I really don't have to.
What about the guys like me who spent the money and and got their date to go through the audit for a level 3?
Well, and even worse, not even worse, exactly in the same vein, Shiva. Yep. Like when I called, so I've had an advisor in the space for a long time and working through 800-171, through all this, Anil initiative, they're friends of mine. But, I called him and I just say, hey, listen, tell me what your thoughts are on this. And he's like, well, a lot of our constituencies already been wrapped around 800-171, But, that was his concern too. He's like, well, what about all these people that have gone through this infrastructure? Like this wasn't just a pseudo economy. This cost money.
I want to blame you for that, Matt. You put the CMMC. I say this with peace and love because Matt is the one that brought CMMC to my attention. Yeah. And I thank you for that because it has improved my business 10 times over from where I was even a year ago to what.
But I feel that weight. Like I you know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like
but it's a good weight.
Yeah.
Because you put a conversation out there that, yes, and I'm sorry, not raise the bar, raise the tide. That is meant to raise the tide of the industry, and it helps, right? It wasn't a bad thing. My sore topic is the fact that when I saw the news come out last week, I literally said, WTF, I just spent a lot of money, and if it's self-attestation, I'm pulling up stakes. I'm done. I don't care. It's a sunken cost to me.
Yeah.
Well, you could always...
That's the reality. No,
you could always have a face like, well, just count it toward increasing your security posture.
Oh,
that's one thing.
You're right, but I hate you for it.
I just can't. I can't get behind any self-attestation type of compliance.
Oh yeah, I can't either.
And I don't know that I can come up with another that even meets the bill today. I think that's what's the most, like, even if you look at aligning to CIS, and I preach it, I love it, it's beautiful. There's no validation methodology. There's nothing that says you're on the right track. If you look at trying to tie to even, SOC 2, you can lie. All right, go ahead. Hit me with it.
I have an idea.
Let's go.
Again, this is a Matt idea from about a year and a half ago. So if it does fail
is this
a year
SRO?
And a half from now.
Is this SRO again? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
No doubt. Yeah.
I mean, why don't we get critical mass together and create our own SRO so we don't have to be... Can I curse on this thing?
Yeah. I don't.
I'll hold back.
We're good. No, I think the point is like beholden to the parties that we're already beholden to today. Yeah, you can say it. Go ahead, Shiv. I don't care.
My point is, why are we going to wait for government, insurance, or anyone to control our destiny when we can just jump in and do it ourselves?
We shouldn't.
Yeah.
We should never wait for someone else to tell us to do it when we already have the power and knowledge and foresight to know that we are actively at war, so to speak, right now.
I agree. I have zero knowledge. I'm just putting that out there.
And I think the challenge with the self-regulatory side is that if you look at just the trunk slamming problem that exists here in the U.S., and I hate saying that term, but it's one that people understand, right? And if you look at the challenge in Canada, that's one of their big things is they're saying, listen, there's no regulation, people aren't very litigious, there's no risk, there's no challenge. So when we put these things out and we're highly secure, nobody gives a shit and they go to another vendor because it's cheaper. And so you kind of get into that same challenge where I think SRO needs to be a part of this challenge. I think that we have to have some regulatory organization that says, if you're going to be an MSP, you must know these things. If you know these things, you must be able to prove these things. And I just don't know how you also solve the capitalism problem that exists around the adoption of using those vendors as opposed to the ones that are not self-regulated.
I think I figured out a way a while back how to get the MSPs to do it. Aaron, first time we're meeting, I just rag on MSPs even though I am one because you give them 5 cents off on a product, you're the best vendor ever.
Yeah.
Right? 5 cents off on $2 is beautiful.
Yeah.
If you build a co-op first, you get group buys together, which we all love, right? And you create the critical mass through that and then turn it into an SR. I think that's your best shot to get people together.
It could also happen with just a few of the major vendor players, MSPs, that are like with the roll-up MSPs highly integrated, or even the roll-up MSPs that have a high level of control at the top level of that roll-up, right? And so if you were to find the Iconics and the RSMs and those players of the world coming together with enough mass, that you could generate that kind of a purchasing agreement to start with to make it palatable, and then have that extensibility down into other people joining. So like you start with 2 million agents, it's a much easier conversation to go have those conversations on.
Of course.
And I think as your other point though is it comes into operational maturity enablement, right? It comes into not just the tools, but the actual, what you and I banter over a lot, Shiva, right? The actual operational, knowing what the hell you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish.
That's why I liked CMMC. I liked the 5 levels. I liked being able to rate a company's risk based on what level they should have been. And, you know, there's nothing saying we can't just rip off CMMC and create an SRO built around it. I mean,
sure. And just saying, listen, what do we consider instead of CUI? We started this on around, you know, the actual components of data that we do process, right? And so, you know, that was always one of my big things around CUI.
Though. I think data should be irrelevant to the point, even if it's like CUI or anything, all data should be important. So let's just deal with this. Let's create a system that treats all data equally in a very secure manner.
Well, and I don't know that I could ascribe to that belief, because I do believe there is data segmentation. There's definitely data classification that matters, and maybe you're just being summative. But I don't
disagree with that part of it. But what I'm saying is,
raise the damn standard.
Let's stop trying to figure out ways to carve shit out.
True.
And actually crack some heads and get something done.
Yeah, I'll give you that, right? I don't think we should define something that should be protected and other things that should not. No. We definitely should say, hey, guess what? If you have authentication structure in place, it should be regulated to this level of this is what you should have. It should be able to meet these standards, and as those standards change, you should be able to, I think that's why, you know, why I loved CMMC so much over 800.171 was that you just had this kind of self-regulating model that could continue to build that. But if you have a SRO for MSPs or SRO for this newly classified or starting to be classified by the government as service providers in general, then I think you'd start getting into a much more, because now you could say, hey, that person that's an internal IT guy that you're going to hire to come work for you, guess what? If he delivers security software, he's actually providing managed services. And like you could see potentially some definitions come in that force them all to fall in that same category.
I think we just need to understand that if you're a trunk slammer, an MSP, MSSP, you should be part of the SRO. I think it should cover anyone who, any IT
touch
practitioner.
Technology. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's my point, right? Because otherwise you just go hire somebody to work for you and you just wouldn't hire an MSP. But if you could say, listen, if you're going to be a doctor and you're going to prescribe medicines in any form or fashion, here's the ways you can become that. You can be a doctor of chiropractic and you can only do these things. You can do, but it's defining them and it's causing these barriers of entry to say what they can and can't do around practicing medicine. And I think, you know, to your point, that was the AMA more than anything.
Yeah.
Right. And as you start seeing PCI DSS was a self-regulatory, FINRA's self-regulatory. And I mean, I know you're getting us back on the original track, and I think that is a solve. I just feel like when you watch something like CMMC that had so much backing, that has so much capabilities of delivering good, and I think hit the target so well for so long is where it was pointing. That's why I believe so much. You know, I feel like an SRO. Maybe I'm just in that loser mode where I'm like looking at the ground, kicking the sand, and feeling like, you know, you can't.
We can learn from losing, right? Like,
yeah, true story.
You know, it's you live, you learn.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think there needs to be something in between the RPOs, the C3PLs, and the potential applying suppliers or the certification hopefuls. And the reason why is because if there is inconsistent standards as to how the RPO is advising that the control should be implemented, and there isn't a standard relaying to C3PLs as to how those controls should be tested, what's going to happen is you're going to have the DIB in the middle of that. And what you're going to have is you're going to have DIBs working with the consultant, and they're going to say, you know, let's just say that, you know, they're ready for, you know, certification, like, you know, like you said you were going towards, right? Let's say you had your package, everything was ready to go. Your RPO said, yeah, you know, you're good to go. And then you go to an unrelated, let's say C3PL, because, you know, you're confident with your package, and they say, no, your package is garbage. Your implementation is wrong. You know, the way you listed your POMs is incorrect. You've got, you know, items, you know, at 5 on POAM. You know, this is garbage. You're not ready for this at all. Right. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to your RPO and say, you screwed me. And then on top of that, now you screwed. You wasted all this time. And now you have an SSP that you can't use. You're actually. But
now you can just self-attest and you're good to go for like 85% of the contracts. You're totally.
And that's why Aaron lost his job.
Yeah.
You know, seriously.
I see nothing wrong with self-attestation. It's been working for centuries.
for anybody that can't read faces, audio, or language from Shiva, he's being most assuredly facetious as shit on this.
1000%.
So, yeah.
No,
it's sarcasm times 1,025.
It's terrible. I mean, the basis of the foundational, belief of an information security person is trust but verify. So I cannot believe that this would be so contrary to that than to say we're going to just trust it and not verify it. And especially with the level of
we
data.
will, and on certain contracts we will, and I will think I think
but what happens in
bit off more
between
than it could chew
Right.
in the way this should have been implemented, right? I think we should have started with level ones and given a fast track process and made it a true iterative process and built the infrastructure for that as we go along. But I don't know. I mean, this is me armchair quarterbacking, right?
No,
So,
it was too. I feel like it was rushed. As much as I would have hated to go through a level 1, 2, and 3, which would have been my ultimate
Did Don
destination.
just say I'm
Right.
a legend in my own mind? My heart's hurt. I'm not a legend in my own mind. I'm a total failure in a lot of ways in my own mind. That's so funny. Love you. But anyways, yeah, I think to clarify for Aaron, just the conversation on the self-regulatory that Juan points out of Juan and I've both been, when we were both leaders in large MSP organizations that were highly mature, just over the last few months, Juan and I both have been preaching about this and saying, right before the pandemic, Shiva was making a point about we were actually trying to get a hotel room full of, or a hotel conference room full of like-minded MSPs to start talking about what are those standards, right? What are those things that we should hold ourselves to? And even if that meant all of us going down that path together and on the same path, and then hopefully getting some critical mass and maybe one day grassrootsing that through, that was something that was in mine and Juan's, kind of books. And, I think you're right, might be right, Shiva, that this might be a good time to kick back off some of those, efforts as we go down.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how ISO started. That's how PCI got wind. That they started all like that, with like-minded folks setting standards together. There's nothing wrong with that.
Here's a thought for you. I know a lot of people have been pushing CIS.
This guy. Yeah, a little bit.
Talk to them. See if there's a way we can put together an auditing body to audit
Two CIS controls with some standard templatization, right? The
something
PSA,
or the other. And the other
yeah.
part of it is I'm a firm believer of doing something. And if you can help people, great. They come along for the ride with you. If they don't want to participate, screw them. And, the cream rises to the top eventually. So if you can create that better service delivery, that more secure service delivery, and that better standard, you're going to pay for it now, but it should pay dividends in 5 or 10 years.
Especially in incident response costs over time. I mean, you start looking at that as an MSP. Yes. I mean, short story, yes, Shiva. I mean, even if you take away the punitive aspects, the positive aspects of doing what we do and having a well-structured security team plan and how you're doing incident response and how you're doing these gatherings of information and how you're writing policies and what's your change control like and what are
Change
following
control,
something.
what's that?
Right.
Fair. Touche.
How many people? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Don's point was the hard part is, are we really MSPs? True. Right? What is an MSP? What is an MSSP? What is I think we're heading to this convergence of understanding in an industry that, it's a little more, it's been a little Wild West so far.
I think I'm just an IT practitioner. MSP to me is just a billing model, nothing more than that. Like, I fix computers, man. That's my jam.
All right,
what's funny is that
out there. Yes, we do, brother.
Yeah.
Yes, we do, Mr. Fernandez. I'm in on that conversation.
Yes, and it's funny is that, speaking, I can't remember who said this point, but, speaking to Juan, saying about classification, is that classification merely tells us how we should treat the data and the controls that we apply to it. It does not dictate whether or not it should be protected overall. Data overall should be protected. Classification tells us to which level.
Well, I think he's meaning specifically classification of the providers and what they're attempting to do and what their purview is in some term that means something. I think is
that makes sense.
Correct me if I'm
That makes
wrong,
sense.
Juan, but I think that's the
That
point
makes
he's trying to make.
That makes sense.
And I think it comes down to what's an MSP, what's an MSSP. Like that line's blurred. What is a practitioner that's serving QE? What was the QE and what did I touch? And like you start getting into a lot of those things, and people like to hide behind the things of saying I'm not an MSSP, so it's fine. I'm an MSP. I think to Shiva's point, no, you're an IT service professional that is trying to drive the overall availability, confidentiality, and integrity of data. And that's your only charge. We just happen to have done it with different wrenches all the time. But yeah.
You know, the scary thing for me is that in the last 3 or 4 months, I've had conversations with a few companies that are in the DoD supply chain. So they're in the DIB. And their systems are atrocious. The providers they have,
I've seen it.
Zero controls. I'm talking companies that are still running owned versions of Orion, still running Pulse Secure VPN from, what was it, March of this year?
Or any of the 55 vulnerabilities that Pulse Secure
that came out
had
today.
This year. Yeah.
Or I mean, Sonic Walls.
I think we were at 96 before my last
And
count.
I had a conversation with one of them about 6 weeks ago. And this was my 4th conversation with them in probably as many months. This is a company that provides a product to every branch of the government, civilian and military. They provide their product to international governments all over the world. And they have the worst security I've ever seen in my life. And not even security. They just have the worst infrastructure.
Yeah, the worst posture. Right. You know, what's funny is I've seen that, you know, and I've seen, you know, DIB suppliers with extremely important tasks to do, building safety measures for, for the planes in the military, building, sites for the weaponry that we use, extremely important stuff. You know, like matter of fact, there was one supplier that built the attachments, for the M4, the laser sighting, things like that, for the weaponry, and they had a fabrication lab on site, under their development floors. And there were no VLANs, no ACLs. There was nothing. And it's like
That's
this
wild.
And it's design. This is your design and
Comcast
fabrication
router
data.
giving direct access.
And they had Sidewalk on Amazon. I do hate to do this, but I am back-to-backs today, and so we will have to end this right on the hour.
Yes.
I wanted to thank everybody for watching. I like to say I moved tens of people, hopefully. So, hopefully we got 10 or 11 people watching this right now. But no, the point is, thank you guys for all being here. Aaron is currently looking for employment. He's a very passionate professional in that space. I'm in Seattle. So as of last Friday, we were planning this already, and then I got the new news that CMMC 2.0 changed his employer's purview. So anyways, thank you guys for being here. I'm going to go get on with my CTO and have a riveting conversation about this very topic. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me on.
Don. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Martin and Juan, and gosh, all the people that chimed in. It was great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks,
Shiva, for jumping on.